highly automated. All good. Picking and packing facility. So a lot of labeling in that goes into our sales to Lowe's and Home Depot as well, especially Woodbridge. So really investing in that logistical technology, and then we'll do packaging and assembly operations here in Huxley that allow us to do promotions and last minute product shipments to customers. So we're excited to join the Ankeny business community. We are looking forward to hosting some tours and things as we open up that facility, including Salute to Industry. We're excited to host that, so hopefully see many, if not all of you, at that event in October.
October 26th.
So thank you and welcome today.
All right, we're gonna have everybody kind of go around the room, just introduce yourself and what company you are with. Randy, why don't we have you start? Yeah, you.
Jason more sweet.
Sounds good. Well, we actually have two new members in the room. They actually introduced themselves, but Brian Herbal with Edward Jones and Tim Nelson with ATW. So Brian, do you want to stand up and say a few things?
Well, also involved national professor for university, like also separate charity locally. The last time I was here about not for profit, start right here. Vice president of Lane, active is further education in Wales. And I've also been involved with the Christian Academy, president of the foundation, helping build an endowment, and really got built out for the best of the family. Got a family here, got 4 kids, very amazing. One of the things that attracted me to this group was also an investor in real estate.
That's good. Thank you, Brian. Tim, you want to say something about ATW?
With ATW Training Solutions, from a personal note, I live in Berlin. Raise your hand if you've been there. Berlin, Iowa. Okay. Built about there with my wife and Michelle Gator, a couple dogs. ATW we're located actually out in Urbandale, but we're fortunate enough to visit with companies across the community, and lately, thanks to the pandemic thing, you guys heard about that, across the world. So we actually, last week, had a couple of our facilitators do some sessions for some European clients that they're really excited to see show on their calendar in the morning at 8 a.m. We did just meet with the pandemic happened, from the number of sessions that we were able to do. So we did the exact same number of sessions actually in 2020 as we had done the previous years. The topics range from professional development, service communication skills, teamwork building, to really more specific stuff that certain industries might have created learning journey around audit process that they had in place. So we've done on vehicle washing, we've done on manhole replacement and tires for one of our larger clients, and then translated that to benefit language to make it more efficient. But Patty said we do a lot of work for a lot of companies in this room. We don't compete.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tim. You can introduce us.
Okay, so part of the strategy today was to make sure that Melissa had to do everything related to the entire agenda. No, actually, a couple months ago, after one of our exec board meetings, Dave Nelson from Pratum Security and Melissa Johnson were talking, and they were comparing notes about calls they get from frantic organizational leaders who say, I just got hacked. And then all the things that happen thereafter, and even some insight as to what happened before they picked up the phone to call either Pratum or their insurance carrier. And as we were talking about it, we went, you know what? This is stuff that doesn't get talked about. So even if an organization, a lot of times if they've been hacked, the public doesn't know about it. And even if they do know about it, they know very little about what happens afterwards. So our intent was, let's show people a little bit about what goes on afterwards. So hopefully they never have to deal with it. But if and when they do, they would have a little more insight into what that looks like. So with that, we fortunately for us, Dave's on vacation this week, so we get Megan instead, and she's really going to tell us how it is on their side. And we're going to get a sneak peek into not what to do to prevent it, because I think we've all been hearing those messages, but to hear about what happens afterwards, after the call. So, and it was really curious for me, and where I'm going to ask these ladies to start off is, what's the typical phone call they get? What does that look like? And then they'll go into what happens next. They've got some things planned, and then they're also very willing to take questions.
Sounds good. Yes, please ask questions throughout because we're going to cover a lot here in a short period of time. But you have the super driven overachiever that goes into the office on Sunday morning, and this is what pops up on their screen. They don't really know what this is, but it's pretty much saying that your information's been encrypted and you have so much time to pay, at this point, 600 Bitcoin, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at the current rate of $38,000 per Bitcoin, I think it came out to 23 million. They usually aren't that high, but they're still pretty high. So what happens next? For me, being on the insurance side, I usually get the call on Sunday morning that says, what do we do? Depending if you have an IT department, sometimes usually your IT department's the first person they call. But if you have an insurance product, we've usually talked about it enough that you call me, and I usually call the insurance company and we get things going. Megan, on the other hand, she's more on the prevention side and then the forensics afterwards. So yours happen when?
Yeah, so Friday afternoons are when we get most of our breach calls and our incident response calls. So in most cases, it happens around 3 or 4 o'clock p.m. You know, we're just kind of sitting there waiting for the breach line to ring. In most cases, though, the incidents have actually occurred way earlier in the week, and the internal teams, the IT teams, have been trying to figure it out, right? They've been working around the clock trying to get it figured out. But come Friday afternoon, when they're reporting to, you know, their executive team or their board, and they're saying, we still don't know, we don't have this under control, that's when they're like, okay, we need to call in the experts, we need to do something about it. Unfortunately, it is a couple days usually before we hear about it, and that's where hopefully some of this awareness is, you know, if something's happening, you have a security incident or even a suspected security incident, the quicker you call an expert and get insurance and legal and cyber teams on the call, the quicker you can turn that around and the less impact it'll have. So especially at Pratum, we don't, that first initial call, and with other forensics firms too, they're not going to charge you for that time. So it doesn't hurt to call, have a half-hour, hour phone call with them to understand, is this something I really need to be digging into further? Or, have we kind of taken care of this and can we do it on our own sort of thing? So Friday afternoons, we kind of hold our breath sometimes because then our forensic teams are working around the clock on the weekends trying to get stuff figured out and get stuff contained. So Friday afternoons are always fun.
So we didn't want to come here today and give you a lot of stats on all of what's happening because we know that it's happening. We're hearing it more and more often. We had to hit really close to home in the past couple of weeks. It's actually the internet here is based off of DMAX, so we're actually on hotspots right now. So it's something though that for me as an insurance product, I'd rather never have to use it, and I'd rather have you do preventative things to not have to use this product because the amount of money that can be spent up front does not compare to the frustration that you'll experience that can't be quantified. So we're going to kind of take you through what all happens. But as businesses too, we're thinking about, but also as a city, we don't want to look like the movie Live Free or Die Hard. Wait, is that what it is? Yeah. So, so yeah, what are we doing to kind of prepare? So.
Yeah, so first, just to kind of start off with, I wanted to give just a little bit of an overview of some definitions of a security incident versus a security breach. This is extremely important when something does occur, where you're kind of defining that event at for a lot of different reasons, from contractual notification requirements, legal requirements, whatever it may be. There's a big difference between a security incident and a security breach. So a security incident is really, something has occurred. And with that, it's going to be maybe malware has been detected on a computer, right? But your anti-malware has stopped it, has contained it, no harm done. Security incident, right? Something that happened. These things happen daily, right? Multiple times a day. A security breach is going to be when that data or systems have actually been accessed or unauthorized disclosure of the information, unauthorized use of that. So that's when it kind of reaches that next level up to where you're going to have a ton of breach notification laws. Once you've said that you've had a breach, you're going to have to talk with legal and figure out what all those are. So within a breach as well, there's actually two different areas from a security breach and a data breach. So with a security breach, it means that your security of your networks or your systems have been breached. In many cases, this might mean that someone got access to a server, but they didn't access any data within it. So one of the important things when we go in to do forensics, if there's auditing and logging turned on, we can actually help prove this, that yes, they got access, but they didn't touch any of the data. So you've lowered kind of your impact or your criticality of what's happened. In a data breach, that means they've actually accessed that data, accessed some of the files, maybe exported it, whatever it may be. Again, you're at another level because if that data contains confidential information, personally identifiable information, PII, then you're going to have to go to those breach notification laws and start contacting the individuals that had been impacted by it. So a couple examples up there, if a laptop was stolen and there were files on it and they got access to them, and then all of a sudden those files were out on the website or out on the internet, well, there's pretty good proof there that the person had access to the actual data and not just the system itself. If that laptop was encrypted, they probably just only had access to the physical device, not the data that was on it. So those are kind of the difference between a security breach and a data breach.
And when it comes to the insurance side, this also defines what triggers coverage. So it's important to know what those terms are and what actually happened. It also defines what you're supposed to do at that time and how much notification you have to give to the company. This isn't like a property claim or an auto loss where you're like, maybe I could cover it myself. These type of policies are written that you have to notify them on a need to know basis, first of all, just in case you want to, like there's not an actual incident, they still need to know what has possibly happened. But in regards to the coverages, there's incident response costs, there's forensic costs, there's crisis communication costs, privacy breach management costs, income and extra expense, and then the liability that comes with the fact that your security system was not upheld, and the liability that you owe the people in regards to their information being lost, on top of like funds transfer fraud and extortion. So there's a ton of different coverages in the policy that are not like the property and liability policies. They all have different names with different companies. So it's important to kind of understand what you have or have somebody else that within your company that understands it.
And so I mentioned this before. Not too far here, sorry. Just a little bit more, there you go. The data breach notification laws that you have if you do have a breach are different in every state. So how they define PII and that information is also different. So we'll talk about in a little bit the teams to get involved, especially insurance and especially legal, to help you understand what are all these different breach notification laws and how do I have to actually report on them? How quick do I have to do it? A lot of them have time frames where you have to report in, or you could be penalized for that as well. Contracts are another thing. So vendors and clients and things are starting to sneak in some of the details about when do you have to notify them of a security incident or a security breach. So again, if they're saying that you have to notify me of a security incident within 24 hours, that's crazy, right? You want to look at that and work with your legal team to say, we have security incidents happening all the time. Like this definition or this word needs to be changed in this contract to a security breach in a more realistic time frame, that we can't disclose information on a potential breach within 24 hours if we don't know the details. So we're seeing a lot of this kind of get stuck into contracts and people aren't aware of it, and then something happens and they've breached contracts and have more consequences that way. So. So. Are you my clicker, or is this actually working? So I just wanted to touch briefly here on kind of what's at risk with this, and where are organizations seeing the biggest impact. So obviously it's a financial loss, right? Whether that's the ransom that you're paying, whether that's just business operations being down and you're not able to conduct your services or sell your products. There's obviously huge financial loss and impact on a lot of these breaches. IBM just did a study, it was last year's study, that on average a single data breach cost the company across all different industries $3.86 million. So we're not talking about a small chunk of money here. It's quite a bit that we're seeing from a financial loss perspective. One of the areas that a lot of companies don't really think about and don't put enough emphasis in is the reputational loss. So even if maybe your financial loss upfront wasn't huge, right? You didn't have a ton of money that you had to spend on recovery or potentially paying ransom. Let's say your website was just defaced, right? Something publicly or externally, visible was messed with. The reputation of your company, if you're storing any sort of confidential data for your clients, that reputation could go down really quick and you could lose future business or current business with clients, which then would impact obviously your financials going forward. We see a lot of this, that's really not weighed in when we're looking at risk to the organization, is what is the reputational loss as well. Physical damage can happen in organizations, manufacturers. We have a client that does some things with different chemicals and whatnot. If someone were to hack into one of those machines, dump too much chemical, right, it could cause an explosion. People could get hurt. There's a lot of additional impacts and kind of risks with cyber and technology breaches as well. So the National Cybersecurity Alliance did a study as well and said that 60% of small to mid-sized businesses that have a breach actually go out of business after it, which is a pretty high number, unfortunately. They're just not able to recuperate, the expenses, and what happens. Brand and reputational loss as well has a big impact into that.
When it comes to the reputational loss, a lot of conversations that I end up having is like, what do we tell staff? Because right away, a lot of small companies want to just shoot out an email like, hey guys, we've been breached. Like, we can't access our systems. You're not going to be able to work. Like, you need to wait on that conversation. One of the things that Pratum has you do also is have your own attorney, retained, that understands your business and then your cyber exposure for the client attorney privilege, but also to kind of talk through what should you do next legally, because again, if the data hasn't been accessed and extricated, there's a possibility you might not have that notification duty, depending again on the state. And so just trying to figure out and have a plan of what would you tell the staff and when to kind of ease until you can, it takes a while to figure out what's going on and what to do next. So.
Yep. So the who you gonna call part. So our first recommendation of who to call is going to be your legal counsel. This is for a couple different reasons. One of the biggest being the attorney-client privilege that you get for the investigation and all the communications that surround the investigation going on. So when you have that in place, those communications are confidential. They can't be shared externally. People can't request them. It provides that protection again around what's happening during the breach and information getting released too early. So it goes back to that security incident versus security breach. You don't want information to get out and then all of a sudden they're like, you had a security breach, and once that gets out in the news, there's no turning back. If you only had a security incident, right, and information and data wasn't actually impacted. So that's a huge part of it. It's one of the things that we recommend right off the bat is to have your attorney or legal representation on the calls and on all email chains, kind of every communication that's happening, they need to be involved with for that attorney-client privilege.
And just to point on that, like if you have an insurance policy, there will be an attorney that's assigned, but the attorney is really there to protect the insurance company. I mean, they're there for you too, but in the end, when you see it play out, like they're there for the insurance company. Just so to have your own would also be ideal.
Yes. And that one of the things too is identifying who this is ahead of time and having kind of the details of what happens and what the steps are if something does happen. We see a lot of times we'll ask, do you have legal counsel? And they're like, not, I mean, kind of, we have someone, but we've never talked about cyber with them. And that process just prolongs, right, the efforts that they can start to take to remediate and get stuff back up and running. So having that relationship upfront, ready to go, so you can know exactly who you're calling is extremely important. Again, the clock has maybe already started on some of those breach notifications. So again, the quicker you can get your legal counsel involved, the quicker you can start working through that. And they can help you identify what do you have to do, what should you do. So there's some things on the breach notifications and state laws that you're required to do. Some of them, are maybe just should do's.
What do you typically see on how long that clock is?
For the breach notification, it's usually around
No,
70.
for how much, and then they have to pay the extortion.
Oh, usually it's around 72 hours. So you're giving 48 to 72 hours in there to make a decision of what you're going to do. Legal counsel is also great if you do have ransomware, talking through, do we pay it or do we not? They can help kind of in some of that direction on what you should or shouldn't do in that area as well. So.
Yeah, if it hasn't been exfiltrated and you have a good backup, there's a good possibility you might not have to pay it. On being on the insurance side, I was sharing with Megan that most all the time pay it. I think it's also probably because most of the people that maybe buy insurance don't do the steps up front to be prepared for it to happen. So there might not be as good of data or controls in place to not have to pay it. So.
Yep. And when you get that ransom, obviously the criminal is going to say that they, have access to everything, have all the data. They're going to tell you that they have, as much as they possibly do to try to trick you into paying it as quick as they can. They will increase ransoms, if you hit that clock, and they'll say, okay, we just doubled it. But taking that time and having that incident response plan so you can quickly investigate and figure out, okay, what did they access? Did they access anything? What is our impact here? Could it help you not even have to pay that ransom to identify what's going on?
Other than it doubling, a lot of our negotiations have also given discounts. It's funny how nice they can get. We have one group that it's like a 30% discount every time they hack one of our clients. And so they think like it's a really nice thing to do for us. But it's interesting because when you're talking to a client, you're saying, okay, like we're going to end up paying this. It's like, how do you trust somebody that just hacked you? That's pretty much what you're doing at that point, is that you're trusting they're going to give you your information back or release your system after you pay them $750,000. So.
Right. And I think these are organizations, right? These are companies that specialize in ransomware and are making money off that. And I thought it was funny when you talked about the gentleman that you've talked with before that, had to stop conversations because he had to go to his kid's soccer game.
And he's all like, hey, like, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk again. Like, it's either, it's kids in their basement. It's like families. Like there's like one company that keeps, that's out of Russia that like kept hacking us and our clients. And it was just like a normal day. Like, hey, we're off the clock. I got a soccer game to get to. We'll start this again tomorrow. So.
So your second call should be to a digital forensics or incident response kind of firm or expert there to help with some of that investigation. So again, it goes back to one, your IT team may not have the knowledge and expertise to start investigating some of this. And the last thing you want to do is start kind of trumping on any of the evidence that's already there, right? So one of the critical pieces in forensics is looking back at the logs and activities to understand, did they access the data? Did they take it or did they not? And when someone goes in to try to figure that out, sometimes they can cover up tracks or delete things that shouldn't have been. So you want someone that is an expert in this and knows what they're doing so they can retain that evidence and respond appropriately.
Terry had a question of why should you not pay a ransom?
So a couple of reasons why, and at Pratum, we never recommend paying the ransom. We know that it is a business decision, and so it's up to the business what they do. But for one, you're trusting an unethical unethical person, a criminal that already did something to your network. Are they going to actually give you the encryption keys? Are they going to actually give you your data back? Maybe. I mean, you're trusting them, right? That's kind of hard to do. In many cases that we're seeing, I think even in the Colonial Pipeline, you're not even getting all of your data back. You're just getting a piece of it. So you're paying it and then you're not even getting everything back anyway. From a security firm perspective, we don't like to encourage that behavior, right? So if they just continue to make money and they're continuing to make hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, they're just going to keep doing it, right? So it's easy for us to say that, that we don't recommend it because we don't want to encourage that behavior. But every business has to make their decision on what they want to do. And that's why, talking with legal is extremely important on what makes sense. Let's see if I go to the next one. Oh, one of the points I do want to touch on here too of why you should hire an external party to come and do your forensics is the work that your internal IT team is doing is not usually covered by insurance. With an external party, you have a separate contract, the security firm that's doing it, insurance will cover that. But in other cases, if your IT team's working on it and they're spending tons of hours, tons of resources, tons of time, insurance won't actually cover that.
They'll cover extra expense. So if they log overtime, but like obviously during this whole time, they never did their real job. So there's no coverage for that. So it's always good to get a third party involved.
And then the additional calls after you've kind of called those first two parties, obviously insurance and where Melissa comes in here, you want to make sure that you're in communication with them, understanding, she talked about the attorney side of it, right? That usually that's representing the insurance side. So you want your own legal counsel representing you. But you'll have deductibles and retentions that if it's a smaller case, a smaller breach, you may not be meeting those. You may not want to actually make a claim on it. So I don't know if there's any more on the insurance part here.
Well, with everything that's going on, these deductibles are increasing. When cyber first came out, it was like $500 or $1,000. Now it's getting into the 25, 50,000, depending on the size of your company. And if you actually had a breach, to have coverage afterwards is usually about 5 times as much. 5 times the deductible, 5 times the premium is what we're seeing. On top of the fact that the things that the company will make you put in place to continue to have coverage will cost a couple $100,000 is what we've kind of experienced going forward.
Yeah, and on that point, I think from our perspective, we've seen an uptick in the requirements that insurance is having on firms to know what their premiums are going to be or to even get any type of insurance. So they've gotten just much more detailed and stricter on that. You must have multi-factor, you must have incident response plan in place, you must have documented policies, or we'll cover you, but your premium's going to be, huge and whatnot. So we're seeing a huge uptick from the insurance side. Those questionnaires just getting more and more rigorous because probably tired of paying out.
Well, and it's going to get to the point too that there'll be exclusions built into the policy that if you answered that yes and then it wasn't maintained, they'll end up not paying. Just because, again, it's multi-millions of dollars right now for these companies.
Yeah.
When it comes to insurance too, if you have like your liability policy that covers your regular business and your agent has added an endorsement for cyber, I would probably recommend asking them to get a quote like with a specified cyber carrier, just because the PNC market, the EMC, Nationwide, all of those guys, they built in something because they know that you need it, but it's not as robust as what you do need, and they don't have the teams behind it to necessarily provide the same type of service that a cyber company would.
And it is important to note with insurance as well, your insurance company may have a digital forensics firm that they are going to require you to use to perform the investigation as well. So it's good to know that and understand that up front as well. So you don't get into something where they're like, nope, you had to use our preferred vendor, we're not going to cover you. So it's another good reason to make sure you're reaching out to insurance right away, so you make sure that whatever you're doing is covered. Public relations and communications are huge in a data breach or security event. This is one of the things I wish President Denson was in here, because I think DMAC has been doing a really good job of their communication and his statements and what they're actually sharing with the community and with the public. It's a huge piece of it, and it's one of the costs that a lot of people don't actually think about too with a breach is what you'll pay for firms to come in and help with this, but it's so important. So with the public, externally as well as internal communications to employees, especially if their data has been compromised, how do you communicate that and what you're doing and steps that you're taking to secure that in the future and to help them in the meantime. In some industries, you may have to contact the regulators. Again, this is why you contact your legal first to help you understand what you have to do in that area. And then law enforcement may be something that's recommended to contact as well, especially if there's financial fraud taking place. You'll see a lot of times there's a 24 to 48 hour window to recall any sort of wire transfer that took place to get that money kind of stopped or get that money back. Actually, just last Friday, we had a new client call that earlier in that week, Tuesday, so we're way over the 48 or the 24 to 48 hour window. Their director of accounting got an email from a vendor to pay an invoice, normal process, whatnot. Well, they didn't know that that director of accounting's account had actually been compromised already, and there was a malicious actor just sitting in there watching, right? Watching what the patterns were, watching how payments were transferred, kind of looking at all that. What they ended up doing was they saw that come through, the request for the payment. They created a domain that was just one letter off of what the actual vendor was. And they said, hey, we just switched our routing numbers, can you make sure that the money gets paid here and not here? And of course, the director of accounting is like, yeah, I'll make the change. There was no verification, no validation steps of, calling that vendor and saying, should I have changed this? And they lost about $380,000 just like that. So really not, Melissa and I were talking about this earlier, really not a sophisticated attack. We don't know yet now how they got in. That's what some of our forensics team is working on currently to understand that. But I mean, really, like any of us in this room could sit there and watch pattern, right? And watch like, yep, this is how these invoices get sent. This is how the person pays, blah, blah, blah. And then the money's gone like that. So. Yeah.
Talk about with that too, there's like a 24 to 48 hour, had they known and recognized it within so many hours, what might have protected them?
Yeah, so if they would have known that, they could have worked with the FBI or law enforcement and the bank to actually stop that payment, and it may not have actually gone through, so they may not have lost the money. Once it kind of hits past that time, it's gone and you'll never see it again. So unfortunately in this case, because I mean, he thought it was legit, right? He thought the email address was legit, and so he didn't realize he had done anything wrong. So it's tricky to get something in that short of time frame and get that money stopped. So, just a quick kind of flow chart here of the incident response kind of process and what kind of happens. So when we get a call, one of our first things is going to be how do we minimize the spread and contain what's happening? Especially if it's something like ransomware that can just spread across the network really easily. The last thing we want to do is wait too long on it, and we could have stopped it and stopped the spread from other areas of the network and system. So that's the first thing that we're going to talk through from an incident response perspective is how do we get this thing contained and stopped, and then we'll worry about recovery from there. So collecting the facts, identifying problems. I'm not going to go through all these because it'll probably take forever, but just going through the steps of your incident response plan and understanding, what's kind of happened, how can we get this contained, how can we get business up and running, and then kind of at the end, a lot of people don't do a great job of that analysis, reporting, lessons learned part of it. It's actually one of the things that is stressed in President Biden's executive order that they signed in May to try to get from the government side and the private sector side is information sharing and knowledge sharing and lessons learned. So if you've had an incident, there's no better way to learn, to how to do the process better and what controls you could put in place. So that's an important step after the fact, after the incidents occurred. I'm sure DMAC will be going through a huge, long thing to try to figure out, what could we have done to prevent this and how did we respond? Where could we have done better, sort of thing. All right, and then I wanted to just talk through real quick some of the next steps or kind of best practices that you can be doing now to help in the case that something does happen or to help with prevention as well. So understanding if you have a disaster recovery and business continuity plan at your organization, do you have a process in place if something happens? what are you going to do? Having an incident response plan to go along with that, it can just help. One, it helps lower the stress level when an incident does occur. You've got that plan in place and you're ready to roll with it. It'll tell you who to contact. So all the people that we've talked about already have contact information in there. Everything's right there and ready for you. So you can act faster and hopefully lower the impact of what's happened. And then with those plans, it's really important to do training and tabletop exercises of them. So this goes back again to the lessons learned that you would do after a real incident. Have a mock incident happen, have a company come in and perform a mock ransomware attack, right? And see, okay, how would we respond to this? What would we do? You know, where could this potentially spread? Where are there gaps in our plan? And then again, performing that analysis and coming together as a team after the fact and looking where can we make improvements. You might as well do a mock one and not have the real thing happen, try to make those improvements ahead of time. So there are regulatory requirements and things that actually require this to be done also. So you're meeting some of those. I know some of the insurance that I've seen, they also require this to be done. So helps just lower that stress when things happened, and hopefully again, you're just reacting a lot quicker. Continuous security event monitoring. So having that visibility into your network to know what's going on and what's happening so you can react faster. I think on here it has about 6 months on average that it takes to actually identify a breach if you don't have any monitoring in place. So the example that I gave before of the individual that just transferred that large amount of money, they had no clue that that account was compromised and for how long, right? Someone was sitting in there. If they had more auditing and logging turned on, they probably could have seen that that individual probably logged in from a location that wasn't normal, right? There was abnormal behavior. And there's tools out there now that will actually detect that, right? And say, you know what, usually this person is always logging in from Ankeny, Iowa, and they logged in, you know, from Florida. And in some cases, it'll be legit, right? That, yep, they're on vacation, they logged in, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's like, no, why did they log into an Office 365 account from Florida? So having that monitoring in place can help you detect things and respond to them a lot quicker. And then having a security or risk assessment performed on your organization to understand what are your biggest gaps, are your largest threats at within your organization. So every organization is going to be different. And so there's going to be varying levels of controls that need to be put in place to help protect you. So it helps prioritize kind of financials, so you're spending the money where it needs to be spent to help secure your network. It also shows due care and due diligence in the case of any sort of legal action that's taken, or when you have a breach. And with insurance too, if you have a risk assessment performed, they're saying, okay, you're taking the necessary steps to try to secure your networks and find the gaps before they happen. There's no way any company is ever going to be 100% secure. The only way we get there is if we're just not using technology. So at least if you're taking the steps, it shows that due diligence and due care as well. And kind of last year, so I just wanted to pull up again, this is from the IBM study that they had. This kind of shows some of the things that actually help decrease the amount or the cost of a breach. So doing incident response planning and testing, so we talked about that earlier, having the plan in place and doing an exercise actually decreased costs by about $300,000 for a breach. So that alone was a pretty big chunk, as well as business continuity. Some of the other ones on there, employee training, so making sure that users are aware of what does a phishing email look like, what should they be looking for, what are the proper steps. If something happened, what should they do? One of the biggest things is we don't want people to feel bad or feel scared about clicking on a link, right? And then saying, oh, I'm just not going to tell, maybe nothing happened. So worst thing you can do, right? So we want to make sure that there's open communication, something happened, and you say, you know what, we're human, it happens. The sooner you can tell us, the better. So doing some employee training is extremely important. Cyber insurance is on there and lowered at about $200,000. And then you can see in the red there some of the things that have actually increased the cost. The remote workforce, so the pandemic has caused breaches to actually increase. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the impact of this on your side too.
Yep.
But there's just a lot. You know, employees are going home and using their own laptops, their unsecure home networks. There's just a lot more going on. It's harder to have response efforts and to actually do analysis and forensics. So there's a lot of reasons that's kind of gone up in cost as well. Yeah.
The one that says the identity theft protection increases. I'm confused by that.
Where's that one? at?
Nope,
Oh,
it's the last one on the
the last.
green.
I've seen it the
Yep.
wrong one. It actually reduces. Never mind.
Yep, just the last one there.
Okay.
Yep. And I think summary next. So really just in summary, don't panic, rush decisions can often cause more problems. Some of what can help you not panic is have that incident response plan in place and going through those tabletop exercises. I was actually just reading the article on DMAC today, and President Denton talked about, it takes time, right? It takes time to make sure you're doing this right, make sure that you have everything locked down. So when something happens, from an outside point of view, it's like, why is it taking them so long to get back up and running? Like, what could possibly take that long? Well, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of complexity. The amount of time that it takes to perform an analysis and to run those tools, just the amount of data that people are going through for that is just astronomical. So it takes a ton of time. And you don't want to, get your networks back online to just have something still on there and just have another whole issue and you're starting all over. So not making rush decisions, really thinking through what you're doing and how you're doing it can help with that. Again, so that incident response plan is extremely important to have that in place. Understanding using incident and breach terms that we talked about early on correctly, and then having all of your vendors already ready to go, identified, who's going to help with what, and having that documented in your plan. Just the kind of those small steps. Again, nothing up here is super costly to do right now, right? Yes, it takes some time and some thinking and some resources, but just those things alone can help if a breach occurs.
Brian, is it Donald?
McCormick.
McCormick.
Yep.
From Brian was supposed to be here, because he's one of the attorneys that Pratum uses a lot and refers to as short-term and members. Unfortunately, something came up and he was be here, but if people have questions about the legal side of it, and then we can get more information, we're going to make a PowerPoint available, as well as one of the few that we actually will record to have available for folks. On the legal side, I'm assuming that, or can you guys give some kind of information about that to say, okay, first there's the initial conversation of, hey, if this happened, can you or somebody in your firm be on call to handle this? And then what does it beyond that? I mean, how much is it the expectation that the attorney is involved in all of that? Or is it once they say go, everything is protected from there on, and you're not necessarily not only having billable hours of the IT, but of the attorney at the same time?
Yeah, so you'll want your attorney involved in pretty much everything going forward for that attorney-client privilege. So they will be involved from the very beginning, kind of throughout the entire process on mainly any of the communications and things that we're doing. So if we're having a call and we're setting up and we're talking through the findings of what we've identified during the analysis, we want their attorney on that call for that attorney-client privilege.
But they don't necessarily need to be involved in every email that the IT team is sending.
We do, we CC them on every email. Yep. So that's why some of this too, when you're talking to your legal counsel, you may already have someone in place. Ask them if they've dealt with cyber, do they have someone on the staff that specializes in that? Who would they assign to it? It helps to have that knowledge and background when you're having those communications and working through things, and especially from breach notification laws, data privacy laws, someone that has experience in that.
Okay, what questions do you have?
So yes, they do in some cases, not as often as we'd like to see. I thought it was funny with the dark side, which was the Colonial Pipeline group. They came out and said that, that almost that they'd been hacked and that they were closing operations and all this stuff. And there's, a lot of us are like, no, they're not. No, they're not. Like, they're just going to go dark for a while and then they'll come back with a different name or something. But unfortunately, that's the hard part. It's extremely hard to track and identify who is actually doing this. So.
But to their point about reporting it, that's some of the conversations we have at the end of the incident of, do you tell the FBI? And some of the breaches are so small, or the extortions are so small in the grand scheme of things, that they're like, why does it matter? But Megan and Dave are pointing out that just all the information together can lead to something bigger, and just sharing the information helps them all learn. So.
Yeah, they're really all over. You'll see in the news, they're going to target the ones that are from Russia and China, and you'll see that probably the most prevalent, but they're happening in the United States as well. The hackers are here also, just like any other criminals that we have, they just are preying on their own country and own organizations here as well. But a lot of times, groups that we're working with, you do see them overseas, in China and Russia are probably the two highest ones that we'll see activity from, but it's all over the place. Good question. Yeah.
More companies keep all their information on their own local server, or companies use cloud-based?
It's a good question. I don't know that there's probably one over the other that gets necessarily hacked more. So there's kind of this false sense of security, and we were talking about this earlier, that if you're in the cloud, that you're secure, right? That Microsoft or Google or whoever is taking care, or Amazon is taking care of my data for me. And that's not always true. Like, yes, there are precautions that they're having, steps that they're taking, but there's a shared responsibility matrix there of, you have to be doing, some of the backups and some of the different things. And a lot of organizations are like, oh, Microsoft's handling that. Well, they're handling to a certain level, but you need to be doing more on top of it. So there's kind of a mixture there. I don't know if I have a direct answer to your question, because I don't target both, right? They'll target whatever they can and the low hanging fruit and whatever they can get to first. We saw with Microsoft recently in March, the Exchange server vulnerability, which would have been the on-prem version. So we saw a huge amount of cases come in from that, because there was a 0-day vulnerability and people were exploiting that and trying to get into the on-prem version of Microsoft Exchange server. So we got the questions like, should we go to Office 365? Should we make sure that all of our email now is in the cloud and do that? Well, you can look at that, but there's risks on both sides of it. There's going to be gaps on both sides. So.
And when it comes to cloud versus on premises, it's also about finding out, because when they hack in and they sit there and they watch, or they look at the data, they may find out like it's not worth it. Like, you don't have enough data, or you've kept it like locked down enough that it's not enough for them to extort. So then you may never find out that they were in there and hacked you in the first place. And then interesting, like the really large companies, I'm pretty sure, and correct me if you know more, but like the Equifax breach was like, their password was admin.
Probably.
So it's not that, I mean, they're all humans too. So we can't trust the fact that these large companies are also doing everything to protect our data.
Yeah.
And you'll have to find out in those type of contracts too, even in the cloud contracts, are you responsible if they get breached? Some contracts will say that it's still your data, so you're still going to have a plan or an insurance policy to cover that if something were to happen.
Yeah, so there's going to be kind of a mixture of that. Some of the bigger organizations, or ones with a lot of PII or information that would be of value, they have people knocking on the door all the time, right? They're always having someone try to break in and get what they can. And the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability is a good example of that. What we saw with that is they could have cared less what the organization was. It was basically almost like botnets, or a bunch of just automated scanning that was going out. And anyone that had this vulnerability, they were saying, okay, yep, you have it. In this case, this one, they were actually being exploited before it was made public and made known that this was a vulnerability with an Exchange server. So what we saw is automated scanning just going across anyone that had an Exchange server. They didn't care. They were just finding it. And what they were doing was saying, yep, okay, I got access here. I'm going to come back later and do something to this. So luckily, all the cases that we investigated, no one had data accessed or exported, which was good because they responded so quickly. But some are targeted attacks, but a lot of them, they just looking for low hanging fruit and they're just going out and, they have some people, the hundreds of attacks going out at once, right? And it'll say, oh, ding here, and then they'll go focus on that, get what they want, then go to the next one. So not necessarily targeted in any nature.
Yeah, I know, we're at time, but what related to that? Can you give any, I know you can't talk about specific clients with that, but just examples. Are these large organizations, nonprofits? I mean, we know we're seeing it all over Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, the industry really doesn't matter. There's something of value that every business has, right? So one of the things too is you may not have confidential information, sensitive information, PII, but with ransomware, if you're down, right, your operations are down and availability is critical to you. If you're a manufacturing company and you can't be down for that long, well, that's what they're going to hit you with, right? They're going to hit you with the ransomware and say, okay, if you want to come back up, and get your operations back up, pay me for it. So you might not even have information that they want, but they know they can get money out of you by shutting down your operations. So really industry size, it really doesn't matter. They'll go for whatever they can.
All right, we got 2 minutes, so just a couple quick updates. The Reality-Based Development Day is August 27th. There's a flyer on your table. If you are interested in being a sponsor, we already have some sponsors, but if you'd also like to sponsor that on the bottom or just individually come, that's going to be a really good meeting, especially with everything that's kind of gone on. Salute to Industry, as Todd mentioned, August 26th, so save the date. That'll be from 5 to 7 at Craig Tool. And then the virtual development tour, results were positive with that, so we're going to continue to do those. Like I said, part of me coming to AEDC was to find out all the secrets, so we want to let you guys know, not the secrets, but the things that we can tell you. Other than that, we have the minutes in the packet. If everyone could take a look at those, if anyone has any questions, or if you had a motion to approve those. We got a motion, anyone second? We got Randy. All right, sounds good. And financial statements. Nothing super exciting on there. Again, any questions about that? All right, good to go. It's 1 o'clock. Next meeting is August 19th at the courtyard, and the police chief is going to be our presenter. So thank you, guys.
Right on time.